In 1969, Japan was known for exactly one kind of car: cheap, sensible, and forgettable. To most Americans, the words Japanese sports car were almost a joke. Then Datsun built something nobody saw coming: a long, low, sleek coupe that looked like a Jaguar, ran with European sports cars costing nearly twice as much, and wore a price an ordinary working man could actually reach. The people who had laughed couldn't get one fast enough. Waiting lists stretched for months, and America's whole idea of what a Japanese car could be began to crack. That car was the Datsun 240Z. To understand how that happened, you first have to understand how little America thought of Japanese cars to begin with. To the average American buyer, a Japanese car meant one thing: cheap. Small, tinny, underpowered, and built to a price. They were reasonably reliable, and they sipped fuel, which counted for something. But they were also stodgy, slow, and to many eyes, prone to rust. Nobody taped one to a bedroom wall. Nobody dreamed about owning one. The comparison some American writers reached for was the same one they would have used for any cheap import of the era. This was the automotive equivalent of a bargain bin toy: functional, forgettable, and faintly embarrassing. The real performance cars, the cars that stirred something, came from Europe: a Jaguar E-Type, a Porsche 911, an Alfa Romeo, or a Ferrari for the dreamers. Detroit built muscle by the ton. Japan built appliances. That was the unspoken order of things, and almost nobody expected it to change. Japanese manufacturers were still fighting just to build a credible dealer network on American soil, still trying to convince buyers that their cars would not dissolve after a few winters. The idea that one of them might build a genuine world-class sports car, something that could embarrass the Europeans on looks, on speed, and on price all at once, would have sounded absurd. It was a market with a ceiling, and everyone seemed to accept where the ceiling was. Everyone, that is, except one man, more than 5,000 miles from home, who had spent years watching Americans underestimate the company he worked for, and had quietly decided to do something about it. His name was Yutaka Katayama. In America, he would become known simply as Mr. K. Katayama was a Nissan man through and through, an enthusiast and a natural marketer who loved cars in a way that the cautious engineers and accountants running Tokyo did not always appreciate. By some accounts, his independence and his flair made him an awkward fit at headquarters, and the posting that would define his life was less a promotion than a polite way of moving an inconvenient personality out of the building. Around 1960, Nissan sent him across the Pacific to Los Angeles, ostensibly to study the American market. Whatever the intent, it turned out to be one of the most consequential exiles in automotive history. Katayama landed in a country that barely knew his company existed, and he set about building Nissan's American presence almost from nothing, signing up dealers, chasing sales, learning exactly what American drivers wanted, and more importantly, what they laughed at. He watched them dismiss his cars as cheap and gutless, and he came to a conclusion that Tokyo was slow to share. If Nissan ever wanted to be respected in America, it could not get there selling economy boxes alone. It needed a hero car, something with beauty and speed and presence, something that would make an American look twice and then look again. Katayama understood the American buyer in a way that almost no one back in Japan did. He knew that this was a country that fell in love with cars, that bought them with its heart as much as its head. He knew that respect in this market was not one with a spreadsheet of fuel economy figures. It was one on the road, in the imagination, and on the racetrack. The car he was dreaming of did not yet exist, but the ground was already shifting beneath him, because back in Japan, the pieces he needed were quietly coming together. The 240Z did not spring fully formed from a single mind, and the honest version of its story has more than one author. For years, credit for the car's very existence was a tangled and sometimes bitter argument. Engineers in Tokyo had been working toward a new sports car through the 1960s. A designer named Yoshihiko Matsuo would shape the body that the world fell in love with. And for a long time, a German consultant named Albrecht Goertz was widely and wrongly credited with the design, thanks to an earlier project he had worked on. But if any single person willed the 240Z into being as the car America needed, it was Katayama. He lobbied relentlessly for it. He pushed for the things that would matter to American buyers, not Japanese ones. The looks, the straight-six engine, the sheer presence. He made sure, famously, that the cabin was reworked so that a 6-foot American could actually fit comfortably behind the wheel rather than being designed around the smaller frame of the typical Japanese driver. Detail by detail, he bent the project toward the market he knew better than anyone. Datsun was not starting from zero either. The company had already earned a sliver of credibility with a modest sedan called the 510, a crisp, light, surprisingly capable little car that enthusiasts came to think of as a poor man's BMW, and that proved that Datsun could build something a driver might actually enjoy. The 510 was the warm-up. It showed the company, and a few paying attention, that there was real engineering talent in Japan waiting to be pointed in the right direction. What Katayama wanted was to point it at the Europeans, at the Jaguar E-Type, at the Porsche 911, and to build a car that could stand beside them without apology, and then undercut them on price by a margin that would seem almost unfair. When the covers finally came off, the car delivered on every promise, and then some. The 240Z was a long-hooded, fastback coupe with proportions that openly echoed the most beautiful sports cars in the world. People called it a poor man's Jaguar, and they meant it as the highest kind of compliment, because from certain angles, the resemblance to the E-Type was undeniable. It was low, it was sleek, and it looked like it cost a fortune. It did not. Underneath that long hood sat a 2.4-liter overhead cam, straight six, an engine in the L-Series family, breathing through a pair of carburetors and producing around 150 horsepower. It drove the rear wheels through a 4-speed manual. It had independent suspension front and rear, rack and pinion steering, and disc brakes up front, a genuinely modern specification for 1969. The rear suspension even borrowed a layout pioneered by the racing engineer Colin Chapman of Lotus, a piece of genuine sophistication hidden beneath a price tag that advertised none of it. The numbers it produced were the kind that made European engineers sit up, 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds, and a top speed around 125 miles an hour. By the measures that mattered, it was quicker than a Porsche 911T and a Jaguar E-Type of the same period. And then there was the price. The 240Z arrived in American showrooms for around $3,500. A Porsche 911 of the era cost close to twice that. For the price of a well-equipped family sedan, a buyer could have a car that looked like exotic European machinery and outran most of it. That was the combination that broke the old order. Not just a fast car, not just a beautiful car, not just a cheap car, but all three at once, wearing a Japanese badge. Nothing on the market did what it did for what it asked. The ceiling everyone had accepted simply ceased to exist. The 240Z broke cover in the autumn of 1969, unveiled to the press in Japan in mid-October, and revealed to America at the storied Pierre Hotel in New York just days later, where the assembled press got their first look at a Japanese car they would not be able to dismiss. The reaction was close to disbelief. This was not how the story was supposed to go. American reviewers, who had spent the decade politely damning Japanese cars with faint praise, found themselves reaching for an entirely different vocabulary. Here was a Japanese car they did not have to make excuses for. It was praised as a bargain, as a genuine driver's car, as something that embarrassed machinery costing far more. Even the British motoring press, historically the toughest crowd in the world for a Japanese manufacturer to win over, came away impressed, with at least one writer openly lamenting that his own country no longer built anything to match it. The penny dropped almost at once. The opinion of an entire nation's engineering, an opinion that had hardened over years, began to reverse in a matter of months. What made it land so hard was that the car backed up its looks. A beautiful shape can be forgiven for being slow. The 240Z gave skeptics nothing to fall back on. It looked the part, it cost almost nothing by the standards of its rivals, and when the road opened up, it delivered. There was no catch to point to, no asterisk, no but. For the first time, the easy condescension simply had no place to land. What happened next turned a good car into a phenomenon. American buyers did not merely accept the 240Z, they mobbed it. Demand ran so far ahead of supply that waiting lists stretched on for months, and, in places, for years. Dealers, discovering they had the hottest car in the country sitting on their lots, did what dealers do. They marked them up, sometimes shamelessly. There is a story, preserved in the biography of Mr. K himself, of one dealer who fitted a 240Z with leather seats and a high-end stereo and sold the thing for $10,000, nearly 3 times its sticker price, and well clear of what a Porsche cost. People paid. That is how badly they wanted in. The sales numbers told the same story in cold figures. Datsun sold tens of thousands of them every year in America, more than 50,000 in a single year at the peak, and over 160,000 in the United States in just the first 4 years. For a car that the conventional wisdom said could not exist, a desirable, fast, beautiful Japanese sports car that Americans would line up and overpay for, those were staggering numbers. The car that was supposed to be a punchline had become the thing everyone wanted and few could get. And every one of those sales chipped away a little more at the old idea that Japan could only build appliances. Katayama understood something else about American respect. A great deal of it is won on Sunday and spent on Monday. A car that merely looked fast would never fully escape suspicion. A car that actually won would silence the doubters for good. So Datsun went racing, and the man pushing hardest was Katayama himself, who personally sought out the American racer and designer Peter Brock and asked him to campaign the car under the Datsun banner. Brock's outfit, Brock Racing Enterprises, BRE, put a driver named John Morton behind the wheel of a 240Z, and the results were emphatic. Morton won back-to-back national championships in the Sports Car Club of America's C production class in 1970 and again in 1971, beating European machinery that was supposed to be untouchable. On the other side of the world, the Zai took on one of the most brutal tests in all of motorsport, the East African Safari Rally. Thousands of miles of mud, dust, and shattered roads that swallowed lesser cars whole. In its very first attempt, in 1971, the 240Z won the thing outright, in a year so savage that only 32 of the 107 cars that started even reached the finish. 2 years later, it won the Safari again. A pretty face does not survive the back roads of Kenya. The Z did not just survive them, it conquered them. This was the final piece. The 240Z was no longer just a pretty face that happened to be quick in a straight line. It was a proven winner on circuits and on the worst roads in the world. The racing victories did for the car's reputation what no advertisement ever could, and Katayama's old instinct proved exact. The wins on Sunday sent American buyers into the showrooms on Monday until the racetrack and the sales chart were telling the very same story. They turned a stylish bargain into a respected machine, and they planted a flag for Japanese performance that would never come back down. It is tempting to tell the story of the 240Z as the story of one very good car, but its real importance is much larger than that because of what it did to a perception. Before the Z, Japanese cars in America carried an invisible discount in the mind of every buyer, a quiet assumption that whatever the badge promised, it would be a little cheaper, a little lesser, a little less serious than the European or American equivalent. The 240Z did not just sell well in spite of that assumption, it dismantled it. After the Z, a Japanese car could be desirable, it could be beautiful, it could be the fast one, the cool one, the one the neighbors stopped to look at. The condescension that had been the default setting for a decade was suddenly, visibly wrong. That shift opened a door that has never closed. Everything that followed, the wave of Japanese sports cars and performance machines that would define the decades to come, the rise of Japanese engineering to the very top of the industry, the day when Japanese manufacturers would challenge the Germans for the luxury crown itself. All of it traces back to the moment a long hooded coupe made Americans rethink what a Japanese badge could mean. The 240Z was the crack in the dam. It proved the thing everyone had assumed was impossible, and once it had been proved, it could never be unproved. There is a quiet irony at the heart of this story, and it belongs to Mr. K. For all that Yutaka Katayama did, building Nissan's American business, willing the 240Z into the shape America wanted, understanding this market when his own headquarters did not, recognition was slow to come. For years, the credit for the car was argued over by other men, and Katayama's name was not always the first one mentioned. The executive whom Tokyo had once shipped off across the ocean had handed his company one of the most important triumphs in its history, and the company did not always seem entirely sure what to do with him. He had given Japan its respect in America, and for a long stretch he did not get much of his own. In time, that was put right. Katayama was eventually celebrated as the father of the Z, honored in the industry he had helped to remake, and recognized late in his very long life as one of the people most responsible for changing how the world saw Japanese cars. Enthusiasts came to revere him. But the deeper point stands. The car that made America respect Japan was driven into being by a man his own employer had underestimated, which is, in the end, the same thing the 240Z did to an entire country's idea of what Japan could build. Both the man and the car were written off. Both turned out to be exactly what no one expected. The Datsun 240Z is remembered today as a beautiful car and a fast one, and as the machine that values have sent climbing into the hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction. All of that is true, but it undersells what the car actually did. In one short run, a company famous for cheap little economy cars built something that looked like a Jaguar, ran with a Porsche, cost half as much as either, and then went out and won races to prove it was no fluke. It did not just compete with the establishment, it humbled it, and in doing so, it dragged the entire reputation of an industry up behind it. Before the Z, a Japanese sports car was a joke. After it, it was a threat. That is as complete a reversal as the car business has ever seen, and it happened because a sidelined executive understood the American heart better than anyone back home. Before you go, check the link in the description to grab your used car buying guide and avoid getting scammed or overpaying. Trust me, this will help you a lot. Now click on this next video to see how Japan came back 2 decades later and humbled the greatest luxury makers in the world, the Lexus LS 400.